Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with jazz drummer, composer, and teacher Allison Miller. She grew up in the Washington, D.C. area, and her dad had a professional studio in their house where she grew up. She was listening to pros recording amazing jazz from an early age, and she started out on the drums herself at the age of 10, and she loves them. She cannot live without them, she said. She is currently promoting her 2016 release, Otis Was a Polar Bear, and that will include a swing through Kansas City on June 30, 2016 at the Blue Room on 18 and Vine. Along with the music, she is a teacher at the New School for Jazz and Contemporary Music in New York. She learned from the best, from Dr. Michael Carvin when she arrived in New York in 1996, and she talks about the lessons she got from him and the passion that she acquired, along with many more tales. So get to know Allison and dig this interview, my friends.
It's very nice to talk with you. It's an honor to speak with you. And again, it's another wondrous talent from the Royal Potato family. I've talked to many of you, and you all have such a eclectic, wide palette of talents. It's beautiful to talk to you guys. So thank you for taking some time out. I appreciate it. So I'm going to go ahead and start off here. And I know that you're very good about putting up your schedule on your website. But in your own words, tell me what's been going on lately. What kind of activity are you involved with?
Well, I just finished a month-and-a-half-long tour with my band, Boom Tick Boom. And we were out touring the release of my new record, Otis Was a Polar Bear. And that was quite ambitious, I have to say, taking 6 people on the road for a month and a half. But we had a great time. All the shows were great, and the music just really started to fly, which is, you know, really my favorite thing, is taking the music from a record and playing it live so it can breathe and change and blossom. And then what am I doing? I've been actually just got back from a 2-week vacation in Italy. So
wow, right on.
I have to say that I'm feeling pretty relaxed, which is great. And usually in the summertime, I spend a fair amount of my summer working with kids at various jazz camps around the country. And I'll be down in Asheville, North Carolina next week with the Asheville Percussion Festival, and then I'll be in California, Northern California for Jazz Camp West, and then I'll be back out in California again for Stanford Jazz Workshop. So that's kind of my immediate, kind of a few things I've got going on in the next couple months.
Lending your knowledge to children has to also have a level of relaxation. Is that true?
It definitely does, and in some ways, I mean, nothing is like performing live, but in some ways I get more of a thrill out of teaching than anything, because I'm interacting with young minds, and young minds are where it's at.
Yeah.
And, I learn from them. They learn from me. I learn how to teach better every single time. Yeah, just the other day, I did a workshop for 2 high schools from Seattle. They were visiting, and I'm one of the faculty members at the New School in Manhattan, and so I went in and gave them a workshop on internal time and rhythmic confidence. And by the end of that class, I mean, it was really early too. It was like 9 a.m. on a Sunday morning, which is not early, but for high school kids, it's pretty early for a Sunday morning. But these kids just totally came alive during that hour and a half, and I learned new things about teaching this concept, and they seemed to really enjoy it, and I left there feeling energized for the whole rest of the day. It was great.
That's beautiful. You know, I fortunately have been to Italy several times, between Rome and Florence and Venice, and I can tell you the historical impact of that area, the beauty, the way they live their lives, which is vastly different from the Americas. Did you get anything from that trip that's going to be kind of infused into how your music is going to be shaped? Anything that's very inspirational or monumental?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that question, because I'm feeling very inspired from Tuscany. And I've spent a lot of time in Italy over the years, but I've never spent time there like I did for this vacation, which was basically renting a little villa in Tuscany and really surrounding ourselves with nature. And we did some day trips with different little villages we wanted to visit. But really, I was just surrounded by nature. So my two inspirations that I came away, two main inspirations came away from Italy with were, for the first being this sculpture garden that we visited. This really great artist from America, actually, French-born, but raised in America, this woman, Nikki de Saint-Fall. I'm a huge fan of her work. My whole family is a huge fan of her work, and it's kind of one of the reasons we went. We spent a day trekking to this garden, and it was so inspirational to see her sculpture garden that I basically went home. We went back to the villa, and the next morning I started writing music based off of her sculptures. So I have a plan for my next record, and I'm not sure it'll be with Boom Tick Boom or another project, but I know I'm planning on writing a suite of music based on her 10 of her sculptures. That's a very direct inspiration. Yeah. The other inspiration I had was just, running. I'm an avid runner, so running kind of along the hills of Tuscany in the middle of nowhere, and just feeling this beauty and feeling the sense of chaos within perfect harmony of nature. I would look out into a field and I would basically just see grass, long grass and flowers and some moths and some butterflies and other little creatures flying around. But then I thought about that if I had a microscope and could really look inside all of that grass, I would see a whole microcosm, a whole nother world of thousands of species. And I just thought, wow, they're all working together to keep this field alive, and it's complete chaos, but perfect harmony. So that really affected me, and I'm hoping to transfer that to my composition.
Yeah, that's symmetry right there for sure. Yeah, that's cool. For sure. So let me depart the calm waters of Italy, and we're going to get into the early parts of your life here. Were you raised in the Washington D.C. area?
I was raised in what was a small town called Olney, Maryland, about 20 minutes from D.C. Now it's basically just a part of D.C.
Okay.
But, that was where I was raised, and that's where D.C. is totally where I cut my teeth. It's where I learned how to play. It's where I started gigging. D.C.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love D.C.
So what was it about your childhood that gave you this love of not only music, but more specifically something like jazz?
Well, I was born into a musical family, and my parents are avid music lovers. So, sorry, I'm outside.
Oh, it's all good.
It's hard to be inside today. My first influences and inspirations were just listening to my parents' records, and they listened to a wide variety of music. They listened to classical music, jazz, a lot of singers like Etta Jones and Sarah Vaughan and, all the greats, but, and R&B, and those were my first early influences. And I always knew I wanted to be a drummer. I guess the way I was really introduced to jazz was through my first teacher, Walter Saul, and he was a big band drummer, so he kind of introduced me to the big band genre. And I remember the first record he ever gave me was this Buddy Rich record, and I liked it. I dug it. I dug like Buddy Rich's drumming. I thought it was mind blowing, but it didn't totally grab me. And of course, at the time, I probably couldn't have put words to that, but then, and I don't even know who gave this record to me. I can't remember, but I got my hands on Miles Davis with, the quintet with Tony and Wayne and Herbie and Ron. And that record really sealed the deal.
Yeah.
When I heard that record, I thought, wow, I want to do this, or I want to be involved in this. I have no idea what they're doing, but it's incredible. And I think I subconsciously understood immediately the level with which they were communicating with each other on the bandstand, and I wanted to get into that. So I was really drawn to the small group format more than the big band format. Although I do love big band, but the small group is what really pulled me in. And then, another huge inspiration was, it's kind of there's so many inspirations, but another huge inspiration was that my dad was an audio engineer on the side, like, you know, as a side gig. And he built a studio in our basement in Olney, Maryland, kind of to DCers. It was like the country. On the weekends, it kind of became known as the jazz studio. So on the weekends, all of the great jazz musicians in DC would come and record in our basement. And
wow.
I was like a 10-year-old kid, tomboy, and I would just sit on the staircase and listen to masters like Peter Betts, who played with Charlie Bird and Charlie Parker as well. And then I would listen to, you know, James King. These are all kind of classic. Steve Novosel, who played with Rasson Roland Kirk, and Etta Jones recorded in my dad's studio. So, you know, even though I had no idea the company that I was surrounded by, you know, the level of company that I was surrounded by, I felt it, and that really kind of pulled me into a life of this music.
Absolutely. So you get involved with the drums at the age of 10, and, you know, the way the brain works, I mean, you could have grabbed a guitar, you could have grabbed a horn, so you grabbed drumsticks, and you got around a drum set. Why did that instrument make sense to you? Why does it to this day?
I can't live without drums. I'm just going to say that. I was born to be a drummer, and there was never a question in my mind, and I'm being completely honest when I say that. My mom said from the time I could say anything, I was like, drum? I was always drawn to the drums and in the music, the rhythm, basically the low end of a track. You know, I was always drawn to like the drums and the bass line. If I was going to be anything else, I'd be a bass player, and I do play bass as well. But yeah, drums thrill me. I mean, I've been playing for 33 years now, and I'm still thrilled every time I play, especially after a little break. I mean, like, you know, I just had these 2 weeks in Italy, and then Sunday night I had a concert in D.C., and, you know, I have a 2-year-old, so I don't get a chance to practice as much as I would like, but so sometimes the bandstand is the only place where I'm hitting the drums. But when I got on stage and started playing, I was like, oh, my God, I love the drums.
Nice. Very nice.
I felt completely inspired. Yeah, I mean, for me, it's just a no-brainer. I have to play the drums.
Yeah, that's beautiful. So the classroom has obviously been the world for you. You played with a lot of people on a lot of stages. But from a formal educational environment at West Virginia University, what did you learn in the classroom?
You know, I have to say I learned in West Virginia, I learned harmony, I learned theory, I got into classical composers, which was a real mind-opening experience, and I learned how to teach there. I learned how to play classical music and how to play mallet percussion, because, you know, by the time I got to university, I was already gigging in D.C. I started gigging when I was 14, so, you know, I think if I had wanted to go to a school just to really study only jazz still, I would have gone somewhere else. I would have gone to a school in Manhattan or a conservatory, you know, or Berkeley or something like that. But West Virginia appealed to me because it had a great percussion department. So I could study, you know, gamelan from Indonesia. I could study taiko drumming from Japan. I studied a lot of drumming from Ghana. Indian, like tabla drumming. I studied classical, so I was able to study all that stuff. And I honestly had a private drum set teacher in college, but most of my jazz studies were outside of school. So, you know, the entire time I was in school, I would go into Pittsburgh a lot to play in clubs and go check out, you know, Roger Humphreys, who is one of my favorite drummers, who was kind of the drummer from, you know, Horace Silver, Jody Grind, and all those great Horace Silver records. So, you know, I was studying jazz kind of outside of the classroom and then studying the more legit stuff inside the classroom.
So let me ask you this. I've always imagined people like Dr. Lonnie Smith and James Heath and Sonny Rollins, they all remind me of the Jazz Jedi Council. And somebody that would have to be in that group would have to be the great Dr. Michael Carvin. He has to be one of the coolest people on the planet. been fortunate enough to interview him. What was it like to go to New York in '96? Not only to go into a new environment, a new home, but to be learning from someone that is as cool as him and is such a great teacher.
How long do we have?
Yeah, right.
You know, Michael Carvin, each one teach one. He is the master of all masters. Michael changed my life. I don't even really know where to begin, but I would say the first word that comes to mind when I think of studying with Carvin is confidence. You know, by the time I got to him, I was, you know, already making a living, not, you know, scraping by, making a living playing drums in New York. In fact, most of his students are professionals already. And, you know, but there was something missing. Like I was missing my confidence. I felt like I was searching for my sound instead of just letting my sound be, you know, and I felt like I wasn't as inspired on the instrument as I had been as a youngster, you know, and I promised myself my whole life that I would keep my joy around music, even though I do it for a living, you know.
Yeah.
So I was just feeling this kind of like lull, you know, and I was doing some gig I didn't want to be doing and all this stuff. So, you know, I was studying with one of his students, one of his disciples, Dion Parsons. He's a great drummer. And he basically was like, okay, now you're ready for Carvin. and then he sent me to Carvin. And I can tell you, I mean, Carvin is a dear friend and a mentor and, you know, kind of like a second dad to me. But I would be scared out of my britches every time I went to see him. But I would leave, and I would, you know, it would be one of these things, kind of like when you have to go take a test, and you're like, you know, once you're done, you have summer break or whatever. It would be like that every week that I would see him. I'd be so nervous to go see him, and then I would leave his lesson, you know, 2 hours later with so much inspiration and so thrilled, you know. And he basically helped me discover, or just not even discover, he helped me let my voice come through on the instrument, and really, really, really broke it down to the beauty, you know, embracing the beauty of simplicity and, you know, utilizing dynamics on the drums and having passion. Like, for Carvin, it wasn't about how much you could play or what your chops were. It was really about, what are you saying? You know, like, what are you saying on this instrument? If you're not saying anything, and if you're not emotional and passionate and have intent, then why are you doing this? And that's really, 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 he really hammered that into my brain and my spirit. And, you know, I really owe it. I owe it all to him. I mean, I owe it all to all my teachers. You know, you said Dr. Lonnie Smith. You know, I played with him on and off for years, and he is another one that I didn't formally study from him, but I study from him every time I get on stage.
Yeah.
And he's changed my life too. So, but Carvin.
Man, what a cool cat. I mean, I remember after talking to him, I came away and I was like, that is a human being I will never encounter ever again. That is a force of nature that's beautiful. That's all you can say about that guy.
And he's always like that. That is him. That is 100% him. And if I would come into a lesson and I wasn't prepared, or as he would say, my energy was off or my aura was off, the lesson was over.
Yeah.
You know, and it was like, and it wasn't like the lesson was over and I just left. It was like, lesson's over, pay the drum. You know, you put your money on the top floor, Tom. There's never a direct exchange of money, and that's it. You know, and he wasn't playing. He was not playing.
Yeah.
And I needed that. I really needed that at that time. And honestly, ever since I studied with Carvin, my career's had an upswing.
Right on. Well, and speaking of that upswing, you played with Natalie Merchant, Ani DeFranco, Kenny Barron. You've said Dr. Lonnie Smith. So many of you have been on shows like Late Night with Seth Meyers. What is it like to get on big stages with big individuals? I mean, what do you learn from all of these kind of veteran players in these big stages? How do you approach it?
I approach all of these different environments like they're the most important, special event of my life. And I think that's a really important concept for me, to have as I go onto a stage. And they are all as important. I'm a really hard worker, and I'm really hard on myself, just as far as wanting to be as professional as possible. And that applies to every gig, no matter what. And if I find myself not coming onto a stage or a gig with that attitude, then I know it's not the right thing for me. The main thing I keep in mind is, in every situation, is keeping my ears open, having big ears, really listening to the music and what's happening. I try to approach each situation without an ego, so I can really keep my focus on the music. And when I'm working with singers, I really listen to them. I have a really high respect for singer-songwriters, especially singers who are writing their own music and singing about real topics. I have a high respect for that, and I have learned, I started playing with Natalie when I was 23, and she really taught me and kind of schooled me on how to play with singers. And ever since then, I've worked with a lot of singers, and I really, really respect singers, and I try to really stay out of their way and play the music play the drum part appropriate for the song. And then if I am going to interact, which of course, I'm an improvisational drummer, so Madonna wouldn't hire me, but I'm always going to interact in some way, but I keep it very minimal, and I keep it to spaces in the music that are without lyric, so I can really leave space for the lyric.
Speaking of bigger stages, this had to be an amazing experience. The U.S. State Department hires you as a jazz ambassador to East Africa, Eurasia, and Southeast Asia. What were those experiences like for you?
Each of them were, if anybody went to any of those parts of the world, you would come home inspired, Also come home humbled. I came home from all of those places so humbled and so grateful for the life that I've had and the life that I hope to continue to have. A lot of people in these places, these countries, live off of $1, $2 a day at the most, and they don't have exposure. These things. It's been a minute since I've done one of these tours, and things are changing, of course. But they don't have a lot of exposure to arts and culture. I would meet some musicians in some of these countries that were insanely talented, but they'll probably never get the exposure they deserve because they don't have the vehicle or the means to do it, to put themselves out there. And it just really, really humbled me. And, I also got all these wonderful influences from other types of music, because one of the agendas of the Jazz Ambassador tour would be to interact with professional local musicians in each city. So I think that was probably my favorite part of it, that we would collaborate with local musicians. For instance, in Vietnam, was it Vietnam? Yes, in Vietnam. And we ended up playing A Love Supreme.
Nice.
With local musicians playing their folkloric instruments, which are not exactly tuned to a Western key, but kind of close enough, And we did this version of A Love Supreme that was so beautiful and transcendent. And it was just so great to interact with musicians from around the world.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me ask you this. You set up the Walter Saul Memorial Scholarship Foundation as an ode to your initial teacher. That had to be a really good full circle kind of moment for you.
Yeah, it was. Walter was a really, really important person in my life. My first inspiration, it's the reason I play this music. And he, he was one of these guys that wasn't exactly, let me put it this way, he wasn't exactly PC. he was old school, and as the years went on, and as, kind of the public school system tightened down the rules, a little bit, he went from being very accepted at my local high school to come in at any time to work with the big band or, to do anything. It was just kind of like, hey, there's Walt, But near the end of his life, he ended up not getting kind of banned from going to the high school to help kids.
Wow.
Because he didn't simmer out his language when he came into a band room, I mean, he said what he wanted to say when he wanted to say it. And that, of course, became unacceptable in the high school system in Montgomery County. So, he got banned, which is really, really, really unfortunate because he was like a walking history book of this music, and he was a real, direct connection to a time in America where this music was thriving. So that was a way for these young students to really connect, and so kind of part of why I started this memorial for him, Memorial Scholarship Fund for him, was to kind of get him back in the school system a little bit.
Yeah,
and also
absolutely.
to kind of, honestly, a little bit of a poke at the school system, like, hey, he wasn't allowed, but here you go. I'm giving money to the school under his name. Ha ha,
Absolutely. Yeah, good for you.
Yeah, I mean, he was the guy. I mean, I grew up, in the suburban area, and even though we were really close to D.C., there wasn't, and then I'm not, I'm not putting down my upbringing or my family, my parents or anything at all. But there was a certain thing that we could all get when we went to Walter's house that we couldn't get somewhere else, and that was no TV, and we would just sit around and sometimes smoking cigarettes and listen to old jazz records and talk, and he read the New York Times from front to back every day, so he was very knowledgeable, and he would talk to us about politics, and I wasn't getting that at home. We weren't getting that at school. So we were kind of getting this kind of unorthodox education at Walter's house. You can't replace that.
Speaking of Walter, great teachers, Dr. Michael Carvin, tell me at the new school, what's your philosophy as a teacher?
My philosophy as a teacher, first and foremost, is to get these students to really listen to each other and to play together as a band. The class that I teach is called Super Trios, and it's basically a piano trio class. And each semester I work with 2 trios, so 6 students, and my whole agenda and goal is to get them really, really sounding like a band by the end of the semester, and as a real collective band, not like one person is in charge. I want them all writing music. I get them writing music together. I get them really, really voicing their opinions. A lot of times I find, I don't know if it's something in the food that the youngsters are eating, but a lot of times I find that students these days they're a little comatose, I'm not feeling that excitement and that kind of hyperness about their passions, so I try to get them really passionate about it. And even if, sometimes they'll be playing and something will happen, let's say the drummer's rushing and the bass player's frustrated, or the bass player doesn't like the way the drummer's playing on their solo, and I'll stop the music and I'll say, hey, bass player, how you feeling? I try to get these kids to actually express their feelings, which is really hard for kids, especially young boys around the age of 20, So I'm like, hey, what are you feeling? Is something bothering you? And I try to get them to really talk to each other about this stuff, and it never fails that if I can get them to do that, they end up becoming a tighter unit, and they play better together. And even if it's tense, they end up playing better together because they're actually expressing themselves. So that's my biggest philosophy, get them away from staring at a sheet of music. I rarely use any music. I make them transcribe everything from records and get them to listen and to play as a band.
Right on. So growing up, obviously your dad had a studio. You were immersed in a lot of great music firsthand. You talked about a lot of great albums. You played with a lot of amazing musicians. If you could get into a time machine and go back in time and see a performance, where would you go and who would you want to see?
Oh my God.
And you could pick a few. We don't have to keep it to one.
I would go, I think it's like 1963. I would go back to hear Coltrane's group at Birdland.
Right on.
That's where I would go. That's one of my favorite records. And, you know, I think it's magical when a record can really impact the listener, because if you think about it, I mean, jazz is alive music, right? So when I listen to that record, I get shivers every time, and to think that those musicians and that group was that powerful that they could play music in a room over 50 years ago and have it be recorded onto some piece of tape,
yep.
and then made into a vinyl, now made into a CD, and
yep.
still, and then it's going through my stereo, and it still gives me shivers. So if I could go back to the actual moment and be in the room with them, I think I might just have a heart attack.
Yeah.
You know,
well,
I mean, it would be incredible.
Yeah, it would be. It would be. So I'm going to take that answer a step further here and ask you generically, why do you love jazz?
Oh, I love jazz because it's a human music, and it's a community music. It's not an industry music. And the second that it started to become an industry, it really started to go downhill, you know, as far as, not the music hasn't gone downhill, but as far as the music thriving, you know, and the business thriving. It's the kind of music that you want to hear, you want to play without any amplification, ideally, without any amplification, in a small room with an audience that you can reach out and touch. It's not meant to be on a big stage, and I you know, I stand behind that, of course. I play jazz on big stages, but I prefer small clubs, and, you know, that to me is so human and real and visceral, and, you know, every time I go and do a jazz tour, you know, and it seems like I go to Europe a lot, Europe and the States. Every time I do a jazz tour, I come home with, you know, 20 new friends that I've met around on the tour, you know, and they become real friends, because jazz is a real interactive, community-based music. You have to interact with the audience, and if you don't, then you're not really playing jazz.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Right on. What's the nicest thing a fan has ever said to you?
It's awesome that you asked me this, because I'm grateful that I've had fans say a lot of nice things to me, but just the other day, after my concert in D.C. on Sunday, one of the audience members came up to me, and he was a man who is definitely, I'd say he's in his 60s, lifelong lover of jazz. You know, so I really respect this man's opinion. He came up to me and he said, "I love the way you cut space," and he kind of did this action, this like samurai action of cutting space while he said that, and for me, that was one of the best compliments I've ever received, because it's true. Like, because he said, music to me is what a musician does with the space. That's how I think of the music. Like, I love space and I love silence in the music. And for him to actually comment on how I'm adding to the space and silence really meant a lot to me.
Everybody has a version of who you are, your family, your friends, your business associates, those that watch you in the crowd. But who do you think you are? When you wake up in the morning and you face who you are, who do you think you are?
Wow. That's a hard question.
Yeah, it's not an easy one.
Who do I think I am? You know, I think, I'm going to get a little deep here.
Good. That's what I want.
Okay. You know, I think I'm a very positive, good-natured, good person that wants to have personal relationships, and I feel like it's impossible for me to approach any situation, whether it's running around the park, having dinner with a friend, or playing with my daughter, or playing a show. It's possible for me to experience any situation without wanting and needing deeper connection and an emotional connection to that thing. So I try to stay really present in my life. It's really important to me. I have demons that I'm constantly battling. I'm just telling you who I think I am, you know.
Sure.
Constantly battling demons. You know, one of the most important things to me is to try to maintain a level of curiosity as I go about my day every day. That's kind of who I think I am.
Yeah. That's a great answer. I love it. And that was my final question, so I saved the hardest for last. Allison, thank you for opening up. Thank you for your time. And, of course, thank you for all the great music.
Great. Awesome.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to yet another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players in New York, Washington, D.C., Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to Allison for her passion, her music, and all those stories. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino on the iTunes Store or visit theneonjazz.blogspot.com for all things Neon Jazz. Until next time, enjoy the music, my friends.
Neon Jazz.